Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited about the topic of today's webinar that is going to be about RPA citizen development as a way to democratize your automation journey. Before we get started and I introduce you to our great panelists and speakers today, Julio and Eduardo, I just wanted to do a quick introduction on myself. I'm Fabiana, the marketing director at Oxys. I will be really monitoring your questions throughout the discussion today. So as you guys have your questions, please submit them on the question panel, and we're going to make sure to address them either during the discussion or at the end of the session. We want to make this, as interactive as possible and answer all of your questions and your comments. So please, feel free to submit them. And the other thing is, if you guys would like to have a copy of the presentation after the session, also please send us a note and we will make sure to send you a copy. So with that, I'm going to, welcome Eddie. And Eddie, we love to have you here.
Thank you, Fabi, and thank you again for everybody for joining on this series about how to maximize the value of your automation program. I'm really excited to have a great speaker today, Julio Viquez, who is one of the heads of development and solutioning at VMware, one of the largest programs on automations out there. So he will bring some great, points of view on a lot of the issues on how to build a citizen developer program, some of the things that they went through as they did it. And then I think there's a lot of benefit of understanding how the road went and some of the things that you should, think about when starting that program for yourself. As we begin our conversations for the webinar series, we've always laid down that the three components of maximizing the value of automation always comes from the side of having the right vision and governance, really being able to acquire, maintain, and have the right talent in place, and also having the right technology that enables organizations to really scale some of these initiatives that are critical in order to be able to control and manage and have the right functionalities in order to bring the benefits that your employees are going to be expecting, specifically on a citizen developer program. Really setting, as we've gone through our series on maximizing the value of your UiPath automation program, we've really gone from the vision all the way down now to scaling and democratizing your RPA for your organization through a citizen developer program. And that's where we're going to really be focusing in today. So as we talk about some of the discussion points that we will be working through today, it's really thinking about what is a citizen developer program really, the reasons why you should consider it, and what are the things that you need to do to make it right. We're going to talk about VMware specific experience while building this and really going through trying to get the organization to adopt a citizen developer program, and how did they went about creating awareness and then training and everything that we need to do to develop our employees in order to enable them to become the citizen developer that we want, and for them to get excited about automation and change their mindset to an automation first mentality. And then we're going to close it out with some best practices and some lessons learned to try to bring it all together at the end of the webinar. So before we, before we begin on the discussion, I wanted to really, get a lay of the land and understand how long has your organization started implementing RPA? So it's going to be our first polling question. We'd love to understand if you haven't started, if you've been at it, for less than 6 months, a year, 2, or more. So let's just give it some time for the audience to respond to the questions.
And apologies, like the third one is 6 months to a year. The second one is 1 to 2 years. So I'm gathering the responses, and I'll share them in a second, Eddie, once we have received a little bit more votes. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so collecting the responses now. So it seems that we have a relatively mature audience, with 32% having started over 3 years ago, 26% over 2 years ago, 11% 1 year ago, and then another 16% of less than 6 months, and another 16% that have not really started yet.
Yeah, so this picture has really changed from the past years and past webinars that we've done. Now people are bringing a lot more experience, and I think that is a critical next step for people to start thinking about a citizen developer program, as have they gone through the path of building their COEs. And we're talking about what are the things that you need to do in order to really get started. So it's good that we have some maturity on the audience. So if we think about why a citizen developer program is critical, there is about 80% of potential automations that will very likely fail to bring the ROI that is needed to be prioritized from a RPA COE. And that can create a lot of anxiousness within your organization. People will want to say, hey, I have all these things that I do every single day, that I could definitely think of a robot being able to do for me, and me personally would be able to really get a lot of value from it. But naturally, when it comes down to building a business case around the time that needs to be spent from specialized employees, it becomes very hard to build that business case. And you will see here to the left a lot of the things where COEs really spend their time on, really, high value impact FTE, intensive activities that could definitely bring more value for the COE to focus on. But that does not mean that there isn't opportunities for the organization for themselves to start building automations. And there's a majority of the activities that could be automated. You would need a citizen developer program in order to achieve that level of automation. So these processes could significantly increase productivity and satisfaction, specifically satisfaction in the days of automation and digital transformation, and people wanting to have speed to response and not having to just key in information. It really drives a lot of employee satisfaction being able to automate their own processes. And the best thing is that these are solutions that could very well be simple enough that do not require a professional developer. And this is where you got to think and really expand your minds of your team, of thinking, what are those activities that I do half an hour every week? Would you rather spend 2 hours this week and not have to do that half an hour ever again? And this is where very likely half an hour for 1 week forever is going to be impossible to build a business case around. But if you have their own people build their own automations, that definitely becomes a possibility. And this is why citizen developer programs could really provide a lot of value to organizations. Now, when it comes down to the definition of citizen developer, and this is a slide that we borrowed from our partners UiPath, is really thinking about what are their roles and what they should do. And there are roles that need to be played. You can have your automation users just enjoy automations being built by your citizen developers. Think about an accounting team that has 10 people and they're all posting journal entries, and you have one citizen developer that builds a posting of a journal entry, and then everybody can enjoy that automation. So those would be your automation users. Then you have your citizen developers, and there could be different levels of citizen development, right? You could have a citizen developer that only builds automations for their own. Think about the next level of building your own Excel macros, Excel programs. And then you have a citizen developer that they're too savvy, they're really savvy, and they really want to help the organization, their department, become more efficient. And this is where power users, instead of self-users, come into play. Naturally, deploying all these levels of automations requires certain levels of governance, which is what we're going to be talking about today. There's a lot of organizations that are very nervous about building citizen developer programs because of losing control. Think about having just Excel macros that nobody knows how they're built, that nobody knows what they do. And when that employee leaves, it's really hard to really maintain, improve, or change your process because you're really dependent on something that you don't understand. And lastly, before we get into the panel and ask for a previous question, there's the opposite problem. 86% of employees are yearning for automation. They would like to be part of this transformation journey that most organizations are going through, but very rarely are they involved. Very rarely are they trained. Very rarely do they have the skills or knowledge to participate, but they understand that automation is key and is the future. At the same time, only 34% on average, this is a study by Bain that was published by UiPath by the end of last year, only 34% are aware of RPA. I think this number may have increased in the past 4 months, but it's definitely far away from widely being known. As a partner for UiPath, I'm constantly having conversations where I have to explain what RPA and robotics process automation means to a lot of executives, not only at the lower levels of the organization, which is what we're really trying to upskill and develop into being part of this. So as you can see here, 34% are aware, but only about 14% have basic understanding of really how it works. They just know what it means, that it exists, but they don't really know how it works and if they can be part of it or not. So this is one of the major hurdles that organizations have to go through in order to be successful at this. It's about thinking of changing their mind from I want to have automations to hey, here's your chance, and if you really want it, here's for you to go and upskill yourself, become a better employee, and really enjoy more your work of spending the time on the things that really matter. So before we start the panel, I wanted to really have a question specifically about citizen development and really understanding from the audience what would be the main reasons that why you would like to implement a citizen developer program. Is it to accelerate the potential of automation across the company? Is it to reduce the implementation costs for simpler automations in order to be able to get to that long tail? To create more accountability and engagement from the business units? Is the opportunity to create more internal talent around your COE? We've started this a long time ago internally at Oxys and definitely found that there is a hidden talent that has now become part of the practice of RPA. So it'd be interesting to understand from the audience, what would be the main reasons why you would think about, a citizen developer program?
And just as a quick reminder, you can select more than one option at the same time. I have around 43% of the votes, Eddie, so I'll try to get a couple of more and I'll share the result.
Let's just give it a few minutes.
Yep. Julio, in your case, what would you say? Would you select all of those together?
Yeah, all of the above, but definitely, I mean, engaging with that long tail that is left after the COEs really take care of the the big initiatives is one of the main incentives, especially for those folks that are involved on these main initiatives or big initiatives, right? They get exposed to the beauty of the automations, and then they suddenly decided, hey, I have these other processes that I, as Eduardo mentioned, that I perform 1 or 2 times a week that I would really love to automate, but unfortunately, right, if they don't make to the ROI level, then it's hard for us to automate. So most of the time, as Eduardo was saying, definitely there's always someone that is either willing to create an Excel macro and that have the technical knowledge, for example, to take care on these automations. So now, for example, UiPath have made very easy, for example, for someone with basic understanding of, again, technology or macros or anything like that, to build and create automation that are not only for them, but that they can also be shared. And I think that's the other key benefits of the program that we're going to talk in a few minutes, is how those people that start maybe creating something for themselves suddenly start also sharing those little automations with other employees, and suddenly the governance parts become really important as well.
No, thank you, definitely. So I have the results to share with you, Eddie. The number one, 81% wants to accelerate the potential of automation across the company. Second, 54% reduce implementation costs for simpler automations. 38% create more accountability and engagement from the business. 31% opportunity to grow more talent to be part of the COE. And then 12% not sure if I want to implement a program.
So I'm understanding the previous conversation around there were about 16% of people who haven't started yet. That aligns with, I think it is not wise to just start with a citizen developer program without really understanding and being able to support it from a technical standpoint. So I think that definitely aligns with the most of the organizations that we've talked to. So with that, I wanted to really introduce Julio. Julio, would love to get a little bit of a background on your automation experience, and then we're going to be sharing some content around the program at VMware and how it's grown and how it was built.
Sure, definitely. Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation as well to Oxys for speaking today. Yeah, in general, well, VMware started this RPA journey about 5 years ago, a little bit of that, and as many of companies that are start with very little, just trying to explore what this new technology can offer to the company, and suddenly we have well, we have the lucky enough that it was something sponsored directly by the CFO. So again, we had a tops-down type of approach in which, again, basically once we embrace the practice, all the finance department, let's say, get committed, since this become again funded by the CFO, committed to to implement the automation. So we very rapidly were able to start creating these automations. But as Eduardo mentioned in the previous slide, we started with all those big initiatives or ideas that either can create hundreds or thousands of dollars in savings, or that affect more than 100 or 1,000 people at the same time, which at the end of the day left these many other users without really a support. And we didn't have like the scale or the manpower to again take on every single initiative. So that's when we started to realize what we'll be able to do in order to achieve this. And that's more or less the same time with UiPath came up with the Studio X platform, which again aids the process for creating automation. Right at the beginning with the regular Studio, it was very difficult. You really need to know about computer science or something technical related in order to create these automations and how to build programs. But suddenly with this new offering, with this new product, then you can have, as I mentioned, people that love to create Excel macros for themselves in order to speed up some of their processes or data analysts, to start exploring these these other tools and start creating some of these new automations. So that's when we started to say, and as I mentioned as well, governance is important, right? Because suddenly it becomes one person that already participated in one of these key initiatives, created a small automation for himself. Then suddenly he wanted to share it with his colleague, and then with his colleague with another 2 or 3 colleagues, and suddenly you have again a small team of 100 people already using an automation that you may not be aware of, or that may be touching or connecting to any of your critical systems or application. And that's also very important, because especially when you are, for example, when you are using legacy tools, for example, that are let's say designed to receive 10 or 100 transactions an hour, suddenly you have this little automation, this little robot that can create thousands of transactions a minute. So that even came to our observation from our IT folks saying, hey guys, what is this suddenly? So we agreed, or we were discussing about automating these big initiatives that were targeting these other tools, but suddenly we see this a grown on these little automations that are now also touching other systems that initially were not part of the automation program, but again at the end of the day offer some benefit for the team.
Awesome, Julio. So let's talk about a little bit of, I think that we have some slides here, but I think it would be interesting to talk about how the COE is structured. I think we have a slide here that really talks about where you guys are located, how many employees are involved. It really speaks to how massive you guys have been able to grow that program.
Correct. As I mentioned, yeah, we started about 5 years ago, and again, we only had about 5 people in fact. And everything started, interesting enough, everything started with one of our directors attending one of these automations webinars and conferences, in which he listened, or he basically stood until this great technology. So he brought the idea, and we started to work that. So we started in Costa Rica and in India. Again, we had about a team of about 5 people that suddenly start working on these initiatives. And then right now we have around a little bit of across 100 different employees working in a way with the program, directly with the program, not counting the direct groups. And again, we have across more than 400 automations, mainly unattended. So that's something also interesting compared to other companies. So most of the initiatives are created, or the automations are created in unattended fashion, meaning that we host the infrastructure, and then the user just basically oversees the functionality. And yeah, basically now we started to explore new initiatives and new opportunities like the Citizen Development Program. This is a little bit about our journey, as I mentioned. So it started again about 5 years ago. It was funded directly by the CFO. So we started to work directly with finance and few other departments, especially on the sales organization, trying to speed up some of the sales operations, back office operations on that regard. And then we continually grow and scale in that regard based on the needs. So currently, again, we're currently working with more than 30 internal business groups into VMware. And again, we close to 500 automations today. For citizen developer, we also have a large group, so we have close to 40 different power users, call it like that, which is people that not only use these automations for themselves, but they also create automations for other groups and other teams. So let's say that there's an extended development organization that we have primarily in finance. So all the finance analysts or so, before they get to the COE, hey, asking for support or help to create these initiatives, it is reviewed by an internal team and determine if they can build with Studio X, right? If it's an idea that is suitable for the Studio X, it's developed in-house by them and then shared or deploy using our infrastructure. So at the end of the day, those automations still under the scope of the COE, but again, are developed by external people directly from the business itself, not by the developers in the COE.
Awesome. And I think here's a slide about the your RPACOE operating model, and I think it's kind of what you just mentioned around ideation. How does that scale onto your organization?
Correct. Yeah, well, you can see all the intakes. So basically, what we have done in order to create a healthy pipeline of ideas and opportunities, basically we have this intake process that come from these 5 areas, like the BPM, the business practice monitoring part, from the transformation opportunities, definitely. The short-term IT changes, again, sometimes IT is not able, for example, to do or implement certain application changes or so they offers or opens opportunities for RPA automations, as a temporary solution, for example. Meanwhile, we still complete a transformation or implementation or activities through policy enablement as well, and through process optimizations, basically, that we work. And then we have this, again, very simple, very high level, process in which we have the ideation, the design, and the operations. So we have dedicated teams working on just working with the business users, understanding and documenting those processes, like for example the creation of what we call BRDs, business requirement documents, which then are submitted for review, and then if those are approved, a designer or a design group take those and create the implementation. And something that's also very unique to VMware, at least my discussions with UiPath and other customers, is how we operate the part of the operation and the support. So we have a dedicated team that provides 24/7 support to these 500 operations. So something that really helps the business is not only to create the automation by themselves, but for example, once they are deployed into production, they don't have to, let's say, keep resources just monitoring the execution of the robots. We basically have a dedicated team across, again, around the world, that they perform that monitoring in behalf of the business, right? So they make sure that, for example, if they have it's a schedule automation that needs to happen, let's say Sunday night every week, then instead of having someone from the business, monitoring or joining or reviewing their inbox or the system to see if the system run, we have a team. And so we basically centralize that function. Now we can, in a way, let's say, justify having that large support operations group that basically oversees the execution of all the automations, all the robots. And in case any of these robots fails, for example, if there is a small change, they have the right tools in order to do those small changes. Like for example, if there is like a small selector change that suddenly happened and IT didn't warn us on time, basically they are again allowed to do that little changes. If there is something major like a process change or something like that, of course they go through the regular change request cycle, etc. But if it is something small, like again, suddenly a button that was in one corner is in the other corner, they can go change the automation and ensure and validate that the execution had happened, so the business can realize the objective of that automation.
Thank you, Julio. That really resonates with our previous webinar that we went through about support and having a segregated team and the benefits of it. So it's really good to see that you guys are also working on the same fashion. There is a lot of benefits of having that segregated, definitely. So let's just get into the actual topic of citizen development. So the first thing that I wanted to touch base, and then we're going to go a little bit, Julio, of how you guys gone about the governance, is I'm going to take some time to really discuss about, building the right level of governance for citizen developer program. And there's a lot of things that you got to take into consideration. Basically, the trick here is reaching the right balance between good oversight and not stifling innovation. If every single time you're going to build I think a lot of people are worried about what I mentioned before. You're going to build you're just going to open this Pandora's box. Everybody's going to start building automations. We're going to depend on it. And then one day it's going to break down and we're going to be in real pain. No CIO wants to be in that position. There is always this perception of wanting to have a lot of control over what's happening in the organization. So it's really important that the key here will be to have the right balance. And there's going to be several levels of automation that will require separate levels of oversight. So in this case, it is a regular, standard, top-down approach of big automations with big FTE impacts that could potentially create big business continuity risks. So you're talking about robots that are touching your order processing, revenue, customer, interactions. Those type of automations that become now business critical, and they have to have a high level of uptime. For those, usually employees submit their ideas because they're involved. And as you see here on the sky wheel, the COE builds the automations, they provide the automations, that the employees enjoy those automations. In this case, we want to have the COE deliver these automations. The level of oversight and governance over this automation should be high, like Julio was mentioning. And then the support model for those automations should be managed and owned by the COE. Then we get into our second level, which, what happens after this? Naturally, okay, now we have a citizen developer program. As you can see here, having the right structure on your COE, it'll be critical to being able to deploy a citizen developer program that is successful. You need internal expertise or external, but you need to have an operating model that is defined around RPA so that your citizen developers can enjoy the benefit of having seasoned developers giving them guidance and helping them build automations that work and last. They're not just breaking every single minute. So at this moment, you have citizen developers now building their own ideas, and depending on their level of criticality, they will submit it to the COE. The COE will curate those automations, deploy them, and then the employees will start enjoying the benefit of those automations. In this case, which is what I would call my departmental top-down development, imagine, like I mentioned, this is your automations built in the accounting team that you have 10 people enjoying that. You want to make sure that your COE, so the delivery will be done by your RPA stakeholder, champion, you can call it many different names, but it's really a citizen developer. Then you will have the oversight would be medium. Your COE will just be responsible of curating and deploying the automation in the right way. So when it gets down to the hands of 10, 20 people, you want to make sure that it's working. You want to make sure that it's not breaking. And this is in behalf of making sure that the citizen developer program is successful, and also making sure that your citizen developer doesn't get scared of deploying something to a lot of people and basically stifling their ability to bring automations that impact more than them. And then you have the individual automation, which is where a lot of the tail ends of automations will fall into your citizen developer program. And this is for things that your own employees would like to do for themselves. In this case, there should be, in my mind, a low level of governance. Your COE just needs to have not really oversight around the code, but it should have definitely a record, an inventory of what is happening, who is using it, how often is it being used, and then taking that data to really understand the benefit that is being driven by the citizen developer program. But the idea here is not to have every single thing go through the COE, because then you become just a bottleneck. Now, if there is a impact to the business, department, or groups, then this is where your departmental mid-level of governance is required. And to me, the main trigger for that is if you see through your orchestrator, through your governance software, if it's providing a lot of value, a lot of transactions are being brought into the business, and then it becomes a really important opportunity, or if the employee is looking to deploy this to a certain group of people. When that happens, that would be my trigger to say, okay, we need some oversight, we need to curate it, we need to support it, and that's how we think, at least at Oxus, that how governance should be done on a citizen developer program. And having this, I think it is very clear lines between what should be done in each one of these levels. But the whole idea is at the bottom, you're going to try to have people just build their own automations, enjoy the benefit of robotics, and being able to really drive their own automations without a lot of oversight.
Correct.
Go ahead.
That's no, so something that that we observe here in VMware on that regard is, for example, from the individual that Eduardo just mentioned, those simple automations. Something that is very obvious is, for example, people is really interested on getting to this, especially those people that are, again, technical savvy enough, those who create the Excel macros in your groups or so, that start playing or deploying with these tools. So we observe, for example, most of them start, playing with the community edition, for example, of StudioX, right? And those are just to create or to play around, let's see how I can connect, for example, UiPath with this other tool or this other automation. And then suddenly those are the kind of people that you may not oversee entirely, because they are just in that stage of discovery, call it like that, how to use the tool, what are the capabilities of the tool, am I able to connect or to to process certain transactions through this tool. But suddenly in the moment when they overpass that POC phase, call it that, proof of concept phase, and they wanted to start sharing, right, like they already perceive a definitive value, right? That's when they started to say, hey, maybe my other colleagues can benefit from this, right? Maybe if they may not really necessarily need to understand exactly how that was developed or code, behind the scenes. But if I can, for example, get them to receive a robot or digital assistant, that's what we also, used to call it here in VMware, right? If they can get like a digital assistant that, help them, with this transaction, that's exactly the moment or the trigger point in which the COE definitely is wanted to start monitoring and seeing, and as Eduardo mentioned, through the orchestrator, those are the kind of initiatives that we wanted to, again, deploy and ensure if this is going to be used for more than one employee, or like that, in a group or in a department, that's when the COE start to, capture those ideas. But the really key factor here is to identify those people that, early enough start, playing with the community edition, or to come, approach the COE asking for, is there a way I can get a training, or do I can get like a license for exploration? So those people, keep it in their radar, because most likely those are going to be like the starting point of this, citizen development program, in which they're going to start in one way or another influence their colleagues to say, hey, I built this for myself, which is saving me the 30 minutes a week that Eduardo mentioned a day, which now I don't have to spend anymore in my life, because I already created this, and my digital assistant, my little robot, is now taking care of that little things.
Thank you, Julio. So with that, let's
I have a couple of questions from the audience on this topic. One of them is, how do you limit the scope of what a citizen developer can and cannot do?
So
go ahead.
Julio, and I'll fill in some of the gaps.
Sure. As I mentioned, basically, from a COE perspective, we start to to control or to monitor those, and directly in the orchestrator, you may create certain rules. So against which applications you may or may not create automation. So suddenly, for example, if in the code they found that, let's say they are trying to connect to SAP, immediately, if that's a red flag, either stop the process to be deployed, or notify the COE, someone in the COE, most likely in my group in the infrastructure team, saying, hey, this person is trying to automate something against an ERP system or a critical application. So basically, we monitor and control that. Again, that's when it's in the scope of the COE. For those initiatives that I mentioned, for example, for those employees that are starting to play with the community edition and things like that, if your company allows, for example, to install third-party applications in your laptops or computers, those are the kind of people that we basically keep in our radar. So we constantly, have like a check about, hey, what's new in your, in your journey about citizen development? Have you created anything new? Are you interested in creating any new? Is there any kind of guidance or help that we can achieve? So we can still, know if they're targeting to create an automation against a critical system. Otherwise, if it's already under scope, again, through the orchestrator, you can create rules, then you can, again, deploy and once that automation is connected to orchestrator, it will, before it executed, is checked against this set of rules, and then you can again maintain the governance.
Thank you, Julio. That's exactly what I was going to say. And I think this is where the power of the right platform that you're going to be using for your citizen developer program comes into play. There's definitely a lot of solutions out there that can click on specific applications, and that can definitely be done in a, I guess, cheaper way, but not necessarily provides the level of functionality that you need in order to deploy this at a scale. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that in the next few slides around how to choose the right technology, what are the kind of things, and we're definitely going to touch, on this point again. But at the end, is mostly based, like Julio was saying, on the applications that you're allowed to use, and in which model you can govern how are they deployed. Or can only they run on your laptop? They very likely, on citizen developer programs, they cannot be deployed in an unattended fashion without the COE understanding. So very likely that limits the quantity of transactions that they can process. So there's a lot of ways that you can do that, and with specific industries around personally identifiable data, banking, and other areas, there is additional levels of governance that should be in place before for certain departments that have access to personally identifiable data or healthcare information. Then additional controls need to be put in place in order to be successful in a citizen developer program, in order to avoid a mass exposure of information by mistakes being done by citizen developers. Not necessarily a breach, but you can definitely gather information through bots and get that information in a place where it shouldn't be. So with this being said, wanted to talk about what are the main concerns or the biggest concerns of implementing a citizen developer program in your eyes. So is it security and controls that we were just discussing? Is it increasing licensing costs without a clear ROI? Is it, employees not embracing the program, your ability to upskill and train your employees? You think, that's going to be a lot of work and potentially I'm not ready for that. So let's just wait and get a little bit of response on this, I think, critical question.
Thank you, Eddie. We have around 20% of votes. So let's give it a couple of more seconds. It's interesting because the last one, pressure on the COE, given the growing demand for support, I guess it's a good problem to have, right?
Yes, the moment that adoption gets to that level, you're in the right path.
Have you feel that pressure, Julio?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to close the poll. And so the number one concern is security and controls with 83%. The second one is increasing cost in licensing, 56%. The third one is ability to upskill and train employees, 44%. And then with a 33%, both employees not embracing the program and the pressures that it can create to the COE.
Yeah, so I think in line with most of the organizations that I've talked to about citizen development, security and controls is the main concern. This is opening a Pandora's box. I don't know what is it going to change my organization. This is an application that I'm just going to give out that will be able to integrate different applications with each other. And it also comes down to IT losing some of that control, which I understand is a natural point of view. But I think with the right systems and applications and with the right rules that Julio was mentioning and with the right training and with the right oversight, a lot of this can be achieved, and a lot of what organizations expect to get can be achieved. The same way that there's scripting happening in organizations, connections between databases and macros running around. This is just taking it to the next level, but in a way where it's less intrusive in my mind. You're really just using, username and passwords. You're just directly connecting with the permissions that employees already have. If they're not allowed to do something, they cannot automate that process. So there's a lot of things that are already embedded into the controls of any environment of an employee that won't change by using the assistant or attendant robots or really deploying automations, because they can only really automate the things that they're already allowed to do. It's they cannot automate things that they don't have access to. So that's a key differentiation. So with that, let's get into one of the key things. And I talked about in our opening slides about awareness and adoption, how little do people know. So I wanted to get Julio's, what have you guys done to create awareness of the program at VMware company-wide?
Yeah, definitely. Well, one of the main thing definitely, or that has been resulting very successful for us, is to showcase, the real impact that, these big initiatives have happened, right? For example, if we created an automation, let's say just for the finance department, we go and show the sales organization, the sales group, what we did for finance and how they are leveraging this technology and this operation. And again, they always love to see. It's very hard sometimes to sell, the idea of the automation without not really seeing, what a robot is capable to do. That's something that we have found, especially with senior leaderships, without they really understanding what is behind the technology. It's easier for us, for example, to record a 5-10 minutes, screen recording of a robot doing transaction. Let's say for a process that used to be, again, as I was saying, like let's say 10 transactions an hour, now submitting 100 transactions a minute, right? So now that really kind of opens the mind of the leadership. And then also showing that to the, let's say, middle management, supervisors and managers, and to, again, the technical employees, that helps the initiative, right? Suddenly when they see, for example, a robot connected with Outlook, reading an email and then opening Excel and, processing some transaction, immediately they start correlating, hey, I also use email, I also use Excel. So if that robot is capable of doing that, maybe for the little process that I do today on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, something I can do, or someone can help me create an automation that can, ace that process and hopefully take it, that burning load out of my shoulders. So that's what is being really successful. Again, show and tell basically what the robots are doing at the big scale, and then people start correlating that at the lower scale. And the other key initiative is, as I mentioned earlier, is like in those small departments and groups, identifying those, people that are technical savvy, that can become your ambassadors, right? At the end of the day, for example, if they already created a macro, right? If you already identify someone that, in a one moment in your process, kind of automated something by doing like a small macro or visual basic application or something like that, then those are, again, the people that is going to be more easier for you to, use as again, ambassadors of that technology. So again, opening their minds, allowing them to get some training, talking with the supervisor or to the manager to allow them, for example, to attend to a webinar like this, for example, or to any other presentation. And then suddenly they start becoming your, the people that, can tell and potentially at some point create this automation that other group people may be using the team. Something that is critical for us, again, is like, not everybody is, even though they get the awareness, is going to be able to start creating automations by themselves. There's a lot of people that, they know how to do the process, but they don't go beyond that, like creative part of starting to develop something. But there are others that are, happy to take on that, for example, for the team, and then after they create something, that are able to tier through. Identify those people, and again, invite them to participate in webinars like this.
And Julio, what we were talking with Eddie is, even if the employees are not ready to develop, but are actually they really understand the business processes and how automation could be applied, you are already reducing the effort of the COE from a business analysis perspective, that even that, it's a good step towards citizen development, right?
Yes,
correct, definitely.
I would say around the awareness, there's two topics that I would sum it up in. There's no shortcuts. There's a lot of marketing internally that needs to be invested in. Once you have the internal capabilities to really be able to showcase internally the benefit that RPA is bringing to the organization, and naturally a strong COE or a strong RPA program internally in the company will simplify your citizen developer program a lot. By having the internal capabilities, but also making sure that RPA is a critical technology within the business. And this is driven by top-down initiatives around automation first as a company. Let's think about automation first instead of throwing people at problems. Let's think about how do we get there, and that's a change of mindset for most organizations. And I think that is one of the hardest things to achieve. But it really, if your leadership is involved in pushing this technology in, then the next step is really investing the time and effort on doing the marketing rounds, on getting people to understand what it is, and then starting small. And we're going to talk about that with a small group of people, like you said, that are tech savvy, that can really then showcase the next level of, we did it successfully, these people are enjoying it, it was fast and easy, they were not coming from a technical background, and they were able to do it, and that gets people excited. So
Eddie,
just
one question that I had for Julio on that topic was that, for example, Julio, does your HR department or your marketing department somehow support you with this communication? Because I think we all realize that IT in general are not the most creative people to communicate sometimes ideas clearly. So do they support you, and how, like, to what level?
Well, in general, they support us to even bring in some ideas, but most of the marketing campaign that we do, it's performed directly from the COE. So we have a change management person, let's say, dedicated to that. So for example, we created our internal, source page or web page, for example, for the program, in which you can see ideas, etc. But most what we do is, for example, we talk to this group. Most of these groups have like newsletters or quarterly emails that are sent. So we always put like a little snippet, of what RPA does in here and there. And as I mentioned, we record these 5 to 10 minutes short videos. That is more than having someone just talking about, what the beauty of RPA could become. Is like, okay, hey, this is a little automation. This is, we just briefly explain what the process, used to be manual, and this is now how it's being done by the robot. And then we just, again, show the robot doing the things. And again, starting at, they say, again, this robot is, again, open Excel, opening Outlook, opening SAP, opening any of these, business applications. People start saying, hey, that robot is doing that. Why they cannot potentially automate my process, right? That's what we do, use newsletters and quarterly.
No, it's great to hear that you actually have a dedicated person for change management within your organization. So you said that you had like 100 people involved in automation as a whole. It's one for change management.
Yeah, only one for change management, because again, we have a very robust practice, call it like that. So we have very defined procedures that allows, again, all these dedicated people to work on that. So this change person is more working toward, how, that the communication and how to embrace the change and things like that, especially on major initiatives. But for citizen developers, I think, again, the program itself speaks by itself in a way. So we don't really need to do that big marketing outside of, again, the marketing of the big initiatives that we are already performing. So people, again, just starting to work on that.
So thanks for that, Julio and Fabi. I think definitely marketing and HR could also play a role in making sure that people are aware as they're coming into the company, as they're being added to teams. And also definitely marketing has a way of getting to people that sometimes technical people like us don't have the right strategies. But definitely one of the things that I wanted to understand from the audience is, what do you think is the level of awareness of the existence of RPA in your organization? So let's get some time while it's being responded in the interest of time. I'm going to move on to the next topic so that we can start it in order for us to finish on time. So what do you think, Julio, organizations should master before starting their citizen developer programs?
Sorry, can you repeat? It was like a small.
So what do you think that a company should be really good at before deploying a citizen developer program? What are the things that you think are critical for them to have in mind before starting?
Well, they should have, as I mentioned, have a clear understanding of how the technology works. And again, as we were talking about, like, for example, one of the biggest fears is security and control, right? By understanding the technology, by going through this, 10% of big idea that generate this a lot of ROI and things like that, allow you to create the processes, the procedures, the documentation around how you want to manage and address, and what are like the potential risks, as you mentioned, for example, in those systems, for example, which one contains PII data, or critical information that cannot be, managed or treated in certain ways and things like that. So you need to be good at that before you start this citizen development program, because as we talk about later on, it will be easier for you to, let's say, self-manage the program by already applying or using those existing processes that you already created for the big ideas, right? At the end of the day, automation in general, it's just a piece of software or code that is going to perform a process or a transaction in your behalf. So if you already have a robust control and security and all the measures for the big ideas, the small idea that comes from little teams or one person should not really create that, neglect impact in your systems or your applications. So make sure that you, go through that journey first, define your processes, your procedures, and definitely understand the technology. As we were saying, the technology itself offers a lot of features, capability to manage, control, administrate, govern the program itself. So you just need to, again, have a good understanding of those to explore and, implement the ones that really fits your need and, that can be customized to your company.
So in a way to sum it up, we're looking about, strong knowledge of the technology, which basically having a strong COE and your model of whoever is going to be able to drive this. There's going to be, in my mind, a clear vision of the role of RPA in order to get started. If RPA is just a pet project, it's going to be very difficult to get any investment or time spent on getting that citizen developer program up and running. And then to me, it's about also having what we're going to be talking about next, which is basically having the right strategy of how to enable those employees into becoming good developers. And that's basically my next question. I know that UiPath has ample training for citizen developers. In fact, there's simple as investing about 20 hours. There's about 11 courses, but just to complete the basics in order to be able to connect to the most used applications out there from Microsoft and Google Suite and websites and web-based applications and some clearly specifically for SAP. There's just trainings that by investing about 20 hours of somebody's time, they can now be in a way certified to be able to use Studio X. So what have you guys done to either enhance or use to enable your citizen developers?
Yeah, definitely. As you mentioned, definitely. So we leverage that content for to enable developers to start, start working with the tool, right? Start working with Studio X or whatever tool that you just mentioned. On top of that, we have separate training on how to manage the project, right? Or how to approach the work project, for example. So we have ways on how to document your idea, or once you created, for example, your automation. As you mentioned, I think earlier before, one of the biggest challenges is like, for example, so suddenly we created a dependency toward an automation that, for example, if that was created by an employee that is no longer with the company, may even threat your way to, keep operational. So for example, we asked them to, as simply as use task capture, for example, to capture the steps, for example, of how you perform the process today manually, and then attaching that to a SharePoint or to some sort of documentation, to allow someone to really, for posterity, in case to have, the way how that was done manually, even before the automation existed, and how that automation created. So again, it's just, walking the path of the existing process by using task capture or any other, step-by-step application documentation tool, allow you to create a basic, simple documentation. And then on top of that, we also have a training, internal training for, the kind of rules or regulations the company may create certain applications. So for example, as we were saying, if you want to automate against SAP, there are certain things that you could or you cannot do. For example, or if you create a robot, for example, for yourself, what thing needs to be considered if you want to share that information or that automation with other colleagues? Like, from very simple, not to hard code, for example, username and passwords, right? That whenever you share the account, you're sharing your entire information, to other things like, for example, how to really manage and treat like PII data, for example, or how to clean even, the processing or working folders after the automation has been completed, right? Instead of just leaving, data or traces of data behind, things like that. Or for example, in cases where it's required, for example, certain documentation needs to be retained, right? Like record retention policies, how to implement those record retention policies, right, that you are potentially are doing today, how to do it also automated in the tool. So basically, we just customize depending on the kind of automation or thing that we wanted to do, as well best practices of automation that may or may not be included in the UiPath training.
Julio, so it seems that the training has like two components. On one end is a lot of internal training of specifically VMware, how you manage automation and your controls, and then you have more the UiPath self-training on the website that, you know, as we know, it's per role, right? For the more basic awareness and business analyst, all the way to somebody that wants to start getting more technical and really become a developer or a solution architect. And that was one of the questions, right? Like one person from the audience is asking, what kind of training should citizen developers receive for UiPath? Do you have any guidance in terms of, typically we have like a path of this is the basic training that you need to start from the academy? And
correct. Yeah, we have a list of specific trainings from the academy, mainly on the Studio X, as we were talking about, right? That's on basic how to use the tool, right? Or what the tool is useful for, kind of training, and everything else is basically internal training. You know, once you know how to use the tool and how to create like a small automation, now we tell you, okay, what are the do's and don'ts of automation in general based on our experience, and again, policies and regulation that exist in the company.
And definitely that's one of the big benefits. If you go into the Academy for UiPath, and we can share that link with the attendees after our webinar is done, it's based on user. So you go to a citizen developer and all the trainings are in order, in time, how long it's going to take you to go through them, so that you can become, I highly recommend it, so that you can actually get the best out of the technology. And now really talking about the technology itself, I know that I just wanted to spend just 1 minute really talking about UiPath Studio as, what it does and how is it really, how is it differentiated with other solutions such as, in a way, Power Automate, which is a really big player on the citizen developer world, because a lot of organizations are already a Microsoft customer. In some ways, some licensing from Office 365 already includes some of Power Automate licensing. So it's important that we understand how are they different, and one of the key things why we think Studio X, at least at Oxys, is a key solution for citizen development. One of the key things that is really an intuitive solution, is really easy drag and drop, no code, extremely friendly, and it connects to natively to every website, to every Microsoft tool, to every Google Suite tool. It will connect with almost every application without having to do any coding. And it's included with your existing licensing. There is no add-ons or extensions to your existing licensing for Studio X in order to be able to use this functionality, which is a key differentiation with Power Automate, where even though Power Automate, you will have a piece if you only want to be automating directly into the Microsoft suite. There's no additional cost, but once you want to get out and implement something with SAP, then you have to pay add-ons to be able to get the package of being able to get into websites and being able to do this and being able to do that. So and the training that, like we just mentioned, is not as straightforward. It's not as given. It's not. It has never been developed at this level. Then one of the greatest things is with UiPath Studio, you can run it yourself within your assistant once you get your licensing within your laptop, or everything is integrated. You can publish your automations onto your orchestrator, your COE reviews it and automatically connects it to your department and only shares your automation with the department. So that level of code organization, code publishing, sharing, and code repository is something that really puts UiPath as a platform, I think, a step away from the competition. And then the level of oversight, like Julio was mentioning, being able to flag applications that you don't want to use, being able to flag when we see a information that it has the same format of a social security number, it can stop it. So there's a lot of rules that you can put in place on the background to ensure that the level of governance that you're expecting and the level of oversight that you want to do without stifling, like we mentioned before, can be achieved. And I know that we just got into the hour, so I just wanted to close it out with key thoughts on lessons learned. Start small and make sure you're successful. require participants to go through the structured training. Make sure that you create internal certification programs so that you know once they've gone through the training that they actually know what they're doing, and so that they can be successful. So these are as simple as doing some of the exams that are in the UiPath portal, or building your own from your COE, which, or using third-party platforms that are out there that can really help you validate the level of knowledge within the platform and measure the success. Make sure that you invest some time on measuring the success. And here's one of the things that I think, going back to the previous slide, UiPath connects all your licensing to your orchestrator, and then you can really share and see through UiPath Insights what are those licensings that you build giving to the organization. So measuring that success will also enable you to grow. So with that, I just wanted to thank Julio for being part of this conversation today. I really appreciate it. If there is any additional questions, I know that we're already a minute and a half over. We can definitely, we're going to send those answers back, I think, Fabi.
Yeah, no, in general, we cover most of the questions, and there's a couple of others that we are going to be addressing, in private after the webinar. One of the things that I wanted to mention is, especially for that 32% that answer that are in the process of still getting started with RPA, or maybe have less than 6 months, I think it's important, Eddie, to also, like, in terms of not necessarily thinking that just because they're going to get their employees trained on UiPath, etc., they're going to necessarily be able to start quickly on their own without necessarily having, the support of an implementation partner at the beginning. So I think it would be great if you can give some thoughts on typically how you have seen clients that are in these earlier stages using a partner like us, and how they start evolving from there.
So most organizations start with building solutions as proof of concepts, understanding the technology, building some internal capabilities, and most of them using a partner to really provide the technical expertise to enable them to go through those first steps. And at the end, once you have a strong, foundation, and have gone through the trenches of getting involved into RPA and having some wins under your belt, then it's time to really get those and really evangelize RPA across the organization, and getting people excited about the technology.
Perfect. And I don't know, Julio, if you have any last thoughts on that comment, because I know you guys are very self-sufficient with the team, but maybe 5 years ago it wasn't the case.
Well, no, and even today, I mean, even after 5 years, well, that was one of the reasons why we also partnership with Oxys in certain technical aspects, as what I was mentioning. So again, in general, as I mentioned, the technology has a lot of offer. So it always helps to have someone like, Oxys or any other, vendor that can help you guide through some of those key initiatives and key opportunities. So as he mentioned, at the end of the day, some of the ROI of these big initiatives, right, that you start working on early are the ones that are going to sustain as well, being able to invest the time on working on a program like citizen developer. That again, maybe it may not create those opportunities of savings of millions of dollars, right, from the idea of, or by helping a single employee or a group of 10 employees in your department. But definitely by having, these big initiatives definitely helps also, let's say, fund in some way this citizen development program, in which you definitely can benefit, and have or impact people's life at the end of the day, as Eduardo was mentioning, right? Maybe you invest 2 hours today, and then you will not have to invest those 30 minutes for the rest of your life on that, very boring process of updating a report or just filling a spreadsheet with numbers. So definitely it's a good investment, but definitely it requires a foundation, as he was mentioning. And again, key is to understand the technology, because it has a lot to offer. So most of the fears or challenges that you may be seeing today have been already addressed by a feature or a component or a setting that can be adjusted in the technology for you to be able to embrace this change.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Julio, so much for participating. It was very valuable to have you, and also Eddie, thank you for the time as well, and for everyone that attended. We really wish you great success on your journey. Doesn't matter where you are, and we look forward to continue having you joining our next webinars. We'll be sharing a copy of the presentation with those that asked. And yeah, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week.
Thank you very much as well for the invitation. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.